listener production.
Hello, welcome to the second episode of our series exploring why selling sperm and eggs in Australia is illegal. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt, and if you haven't listened to this morning's ep yet, I would encourage you to hit play on that one before listening to this next deep dive. The cost of living crisis has forced a lot of us to have a closer look at our expenses and also check out some side hustles. Overseas, it's perfectly legal to sell your own eggs and sperm, sometimes for a very tidy amount. But in Australia, it is completely illegal. Only altruistic donation is allowed, and maybe as a result, there just aren't that many people donating. In part one of this two-part series, we looked at the case for reconsidering this rule. Now we are going to hear the other side of the argument. Joining me now is Narelle Dickinson. She's the Clinic Director of Lotus Health and Psychology. Narelle, welcome to the briefing. Look, to start us off, let's reset. Explain how we ended up with the law in Australia that makes it illegal to sell eggs and sperm.
Yeah, I think it's important first to distinguish between altruistic donation, compensated donation, and fully paid or commercial donation, because there are distinctions there. And really what we're talking about is the idea of what expenses might be repaid to a donor, sort of for the effort of the work that they do in providing their donation. And currently in Australia, in a model that we consider to be altruistic, it is very minimal compensation. It might be $50 or $100, very, very minimal, which is really just designed to perhaps cover transport costs or something of that nature. And that's a bit different to maybe a compensated model where there might be a sort of per diem, so a cost for the work or the effort per day, a little bit more in terms of transport and so on. But it's still about compensating rather than paying. And I think that's the difference when we're talking about fully paid or commercial donation, which might be the model that happens in a lot of places overseas, where really there is a value or a dollar amount put on the cost of the donation. Maybe it's $5,000 or $10,000. So I just think it's important first to distinguish those differences. In terms of why we do this differently in Australia, I think really it's the answer is probably why do we do lots of things differently in Australia? You know, why do we have different laws on gun control? Why do we have different laws about when it's legal to drink? Different social groups have different moral basis of what's okay and what's not okay, and the laws that emerge sit around that. We actually have inconsistent legislation from state to state and then federally around this, so there is not absolute consistency even within Australia, but there are certain acts which are similar. In Queensland, where I am, the Act was actually enacted back in 1979, and it doesn't just cover eggs and sperm and embryo donation. It also covers blood products, organ transplants, all sorts of things. So it's actually an Anatomy and Transplantation Act that we rely on. But as you can probably imagine, an act that was written 45 years ago was really no more able to consider the world we're living in now, where we're thinking about donation and whether eggs should be sold or sperm should be sold, then they were able to think about flying cars. You know, this is science fiction stuff for the time that we're talking about. So the laws were made at a time in a place, and they're quite cumbersome in trying to keep up with what it is that's actually happening and the question of whether or not this is an okay thing to do.
Yeah, so that brings me to my next question, Narelle, which is, do you think it's inherently wrong to be able to sell a part of your body?
I guess as a fertility counsellor who provides counselling to people who are considering using a donor or considering becoming a donor, I get paid for the work that I do. So do I think people should be paid for their effort? Yes, I do. But I think it's the risks that are attached to that. And there's some research which has come out about where donors are paid. And I guess what it doesn't link to is what donors see as being their role. So that the adding a payment to the act of donation doesn't make that person more able to consider what that donation represents or the implications of that donation down the track for themselves, for any kids that they might have, for the person who's going to be born as a result of that donation. And some of the research on this particularly ascribes to sperm donation, where it shows that the money that they're going to get today for the donation, they're thinking about the money today. They're not thinking about, oh, now I have an obligation to let myself be known to that person in another 18 years' time when they're reaching adult age. That it doesn't kind of link into that obligation of what is it we're actually doing when we're donating. So it's important that we don't start to create donation as a commodity, as something that we're commodifying what a person is because we're ascribing a financial value to that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you make. Have we seen proof overseas where people are able to sell things like eggs and sperm, that is a problem that comes up with, down the track once those donated eggs or sperm are human beings that are walking around going, who is my biological mother or father, that they're running into those issues later down the track?
Look, absolutely. I think anything which encourages a person to donate for money says, I'm going to donate more often to make more money. And then we've got all sorts of issues about larger donor cohorts and all of the genetic implications for multi-generations that are attached to that. And if the value of the donation is not making me think about that, I'm simply going to be donating more often. If I'm a 23-year-old man and I'm trying to cover my college fees, and I know that I'm going to get $100 per donation or $500 per donation, I am just inherently motivated to keep on donating more and more often because that's where my financial reward will be coming through.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And I suppose, though, the question then is, we've spoken to another expert who said that there aren't really that many donors. So could that potentially show that the way the system is at the moment maybe needs a rethink in terms of, if not being able to sell, then at least being compensated for those donations?
There are plenty of individuals who feel that if it's not a fully altruistic act, then the person shouldn't be donating at all. But the definition of what is a reasonable donation before it starts to become commodification is a really, really complex question. And we probably haven't had the conversation in Australia. There's been very much altruistic or not at all.
You work with and speak to a lot of donor-conceived people. I'm interested to know what they've told you about the psychological impact of coming from a donated sperm or egg.
I wonder if I can walk you through something with this and start thinking about what this commodification concept I'm talking about is. Let's leave donation aside for a second and imagine I want to go to see a Taylor Swift concert, okay? So I can see that the advertised base ticket is $300 and I'm happy to pay that. But all of a sudden, I can see that if I pay $1,000 or $2,000, I could get front row tickets or I could get a backstage pass. So the features are being added on here. Now, hopefully, I haven't got caught up with a reseller. Hopefully, I got in early and got my ticket at a good price. And I haven't had to go to a reseller and pay $10,000 or $20,000 to get the same ticket with exactly the same things. That's okay. That's a free market economy. That's how we work when we're buying products. But if we start to think about that in terms of choosing a donor, and really when we're choosing a donor, we're choosing the characteristics or the features that we would like to see in our child. That's starting to make a child or a person, because that's really important, they're going to grow up to be people, adults, we're starting to see them like products as well. And that starts to feel pretty ick, to be honest. Mm-hmm. So let's imagine the difference between you and I, Sacha. So I think you might have blue eyes and you've obviously got blonde hair. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering whether that is more valuable. Those characteristics are more valuable than my characteristics, which are brown eyes and red hair. Now maybe we're both university graduates, so we've got a little bit of value there, hopefully. But are we less valuable because we're a psychologist and a journalist and not a medical student or an engineer or a dentist? And now do we have less of a value because we both wear glasses? Or do we have more of a value because we learnt to play the violin when we were in school or we're good at volleyball? the value is starting to be ascribed to those features because that's what the buyer is looking for at that point, just like I might have been looking for those features in my Taylor Swift ticket. And that's starting to become uncomfortable because that is starting to look at product value and not a person. Now, I wonder if I grew up knowing I was donor conceived and my parents come back and tell me my origin story about, let's talk the classic heterosexual couple origin story. We wanted to have a baby very, very much. We tried for years and years. It didn't work. And so a very lovely lady gave us some eggs and then we had you. How did you choose your donor, Mum? Oh, well, I went through a catalogue until I found all of the features and I paid for the ones that I really wanted. Now, if I'm starting to sound a little bit hysterical, this is exactly the way these paid donations work. This is starting to become commodification. For the donor-conceived person, that's also a lot of pressure. I've got to live up to that. I've got to be that musical person. I've got to be that volleyball person. I've got to be the smart kid who goes and gets a med degree as well. And that's starting to feel quite uncomfortable as well.
Such an interesting way to put it, Narelle. Thank you for making me think harder about it. And as you said, I guess it's not as simple as can I sell a part of my body? It's, well, what happens down the track when that part of your body becomes another human being? Thank you so much for talking to us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sacha.
That was Narelle Dickinson. She's the Clinic Director of Lotus Health and Psychology. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this issue now that you've heard both episodes. Send us a voice message or DM us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. We would love to share your thoughts on a future ep. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it, we would love that. And be sure to keep up with our other content on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you next time.